You've been listening to Free Radio Olympia in Olympia, Washington, 98.5 FM, a pirate radio for you.
You all set, Drew?
I am.
Hey, nice show. And it was actually kind of nice. I got to drive up today and, kind of listen to your program as we're, getting here. And, it's always nice for me to kind of hear the local media, the honest-to-goodness, grassroots, First Amendment kind of stuff. Well, for those of you that have tuned in before, welcome back to Reclaiming Democracy. Today's show, we're going to be talking with Drew. He's one of our local free radio / pirate radio, however you want to call yourself, DJs here. And he's been kind enough to spend maybe half an hour or so kind of talking elements of, let's say, the corporate media, the media in general, community media, media for profit, non-profit media, and its effect on the notion of democracy. It's actually, I think if we had the time, we could probably spend maybe an hour or two weekly, every day,
Easily,
on this topic and look at the effect the media has on it. But maybe if we could start off with a little intro, because not everyone is actually listened to pirate radio. Maybe they've tuned into it and not realized they're listening to a non-FCC licensed station. Right. Maybe you could kind of explain a little bit about what Free Radio Olympia is, in a nutshell. I mean, and there's a lot of ways you can explain it, but cover like mission statement. What unites all you DJs together? What role do you play? Stuff like that.
Free Radio Olympia is a community radio station like almost any other, except we didn't go through the process of getting an FCC license to do what we're doing. What we're doing is a Class C felony. It's illegal to broadcast without a license. We're doing that because it's very important to democracy and to media democracy especially that we have a free voice, that we're not restricted by commercial interests or restricted in what we say on the air.
Just kind of in a nutshell, when you talk about, having a license or not having a license, are you saying that pretty much all the other media, well, say media broadcast by the air, I guess that would be for TV and for radio, they all have to have a broadcaster's license, correct?
Since about the 1930s, 1934, they've had a license structure, which essentially means that in order to meet that high standard, you have to have a lot of money. Even for a little 100-watt, what we call a micro radio station or micro power radio, there are a lot of hoops to step through in order to get a license.
Maybe
and there's a limited number of those licenses available.
Later on, let's go back to the whole money issue and when operating a station such as this. But maybe you could just kind of go back and talk about, what's the goal here at Free Radio Olympia? Is there a common theme with all the DJs? What unites you guys? Is there a mission?
Free Radio Olympia is a collective.
Okay.
We run on consensus basis.
Consensus, that's a nice word. I like that.
Yeah. We have, in our decision-making structures, when we have to make policy decisions, we make those in a consensus model. Individual DJs have their own voices. So we don't have, for instance, a program director or somebody who's saying what content has to happen or when I have to stop and read a PSA or how many PSAs I have to slide in. If I want to play an entire album, I can do that. You can't do that on commercial radio. You can't play more than 2 songs off of the same album in the same day.
We got to get to that one later on, but real quick, who makes those rules?
The Federal Communications Commission, by and large. Also, commercial interests that run radio stations and radio networks. Most stations are not independently owned, even when they are commercially owned.
Here's another area of interest. What role, if you could put it that way, what role does Free Radio Olympia play in this town, in our community right here?
Well, we serve our community in a variety of ways. We do cover local news on pretty much an ad hoc basis. We import community-created news, free speech radio news, for instance, Democracy Now!. We import those over the internet and we broadcast those locally here on the air for people that don't have an internet connection.
You know what, if you don't mind the little
We also
plug,
play music.
Yeah, definitely. I hear your music all the time. And actually local music, I don't know how you guys do it.
A lot of local
music. A small
music.
space. But,
a lot of local music.
How about, I heard your show coming up. Why don't you go throw a plug out for that and explain, your role on that, because that's a service to the community essentially.
I do a show as an Olympia Cop Watch organizer, and that's basically an organized tactic, if you will. It's not an organization as much as a tactic, but cop watching is, like it sounds, watching police officers doing their jobs in public. And I organize a weekly radio show from 5 to 6 on Tuesdays, 98.5 FM. And that allows people to call in or tell their stories and what happened to them, or to tune in and get the news and find out what's out there right now. I read the news, often from the internet, to the air. I also report news that's happened as a cop watcher that I've seen myself.
How about, I like to look at the whole issue of, community media, be it for-profit, not-for-profit. And I like to make that distinguish because there is a difference there. What else would you say is, honest to goodness, community media? And that goes to print, too, in this area.
In this area, we're a media-rich area. Olympia is blessed with a community radio station, which is run out of, called KAOS. It's run out of the Evergreen State College. That is very established. I think they celebrated their 25th year last year. Maybe it's 26 now. So they're pretty well established. There is a local newspaper that's more than 10 years old now, or is it 15? I think they're just 10 years old now, called The Works in Progress. No, it is 15. And they, and Fro is just about to turn 5.
Ooh.
So we're...
That's
in March,
actually
we turn 5 years old.
A typical pirate radio station. There's a good thing. How long do they usually last?
I don't know. I actually don't know a lot about the rest of the micro radio movement in the United States. I know a lot about Fro, but I haven't been in any other radio collectives before this. And
what was your experience?
I know a little bit about Santa Cruz, but
what was your experience stepping into this operation?
I came on as a guest. I was interviewed about probably Green Party issues or some of my political work. And the DJ that brought us in sponsored me to become a member of Free Radio Olympia. There were 2 of us that came on to that person's show. And I got sponsored in. I became pretty active in producing news almost immediately.
Is there a lot of people that kind of rotate through, through the place here?
I can't say how many collective members we have, but it's more than 100.
Whoa, that's actually, I didn't know it'd be that many. Now, here's another thing I want to throw out there, and you covered it a little bit earlier on. Does Free Radio Olympia function, does it or doesn't it function like a democracy? I mean, you talked about that.
Free Radio Olympia is a democracy. Like I said, we make decisions on a collective basis. It's not a representative democracy, like some people might be used to the Congress or the Senate or the State House working, where you're electing somebody and they serve a fixed period of time. We've just recently begun to restructure and kind of get a little bit more structured in terms of having committees, standing committees, and membership in committees. We hadn't done that before. Everything had been organized pretty much ad hoc. But when we meet, our decisions are made by consensus. And the people that want to work on a project step up and work on it, or the project doesn't happen.
Okay. Let's tell you what, we've covered that pretty good. I appreciate that. Let's go to the whole notion of corporate media, and also let's lump in for-profit media. Stuff that could be local, stuff that could be on the national level, and focus on that. First off, what is your take, or what could you say about why corporate media does what it does? How does it function? What's its mission statement? Why does it exist?
Well, at its base, corporate media's job is to sell eyeballs and ears. If you're in radio, you're not selling eyeballs quite so much as ears. If you're in television, you're selling eyeballs and ears.
So in other words, you're saying it's all, pretty much ad space.
A lot of it is advertising space, especially the content. I mean, the content these days is packaged just as well as the advertising is to make sure that products are placed and make sure that lifestyles are upheld.
Okay, let's dovetail into that a little bit and talk about its effect? And you can pick any entity out there, any big media out there, and say, what is its effect on society at large?
Multiple effects on multiple levels. The most basic effect I think that modern media has, especially corporate media, is it makes people feel worthless. It makes people feel like they're inadequate. Their teeth aren't shiny enough. They're not skinny enough. They're not pretty enough. They're not white enough or black enough. It's never going to tell you that everything is okay. Yep. It's never going to tell you that you're sexy on the inside. It's always going to say, you've got to buy this floor polish, or you have to buy this beer, or you have to buy this car, and then you'll be an adequate person. It's always going to do that. So basically, it's there to make you feel awful.
Okay. Yeah.
It has to in order to do its job.
I guess what I'm hearing from this is, pretty much people out there that, are just feeling great about themselves, have a good life, are connected with their community, with their family and stuff like that. They're not very good, marketably acceptable. They can't be hit by the marketing scheme and whatnot.
Well, it's not that they're immune to advertising. Mm-hmm. There's other advertising venues for those people to try to reach out to them. But we're talking mostly about television and commercial radio. People who do not watch television have a greater tendency, in my personal experience, to be connected to their communities. People who watch television have a greater degree of irrational fears about crime, irrational fears about the other, and they don't spend a lot of time in their community because they're home during those hours when they're not working and they're watching a TV.
How about, what is the role, or more importantly, what's the effect on the notion of democracy? Let's get back to that original topic. With media doing whatever, be it for profit, be it trying to sell, the ad space, things like that, and as you put it, kind of make general society feel inferior in some way, so they'll buy the product. How do they affect democracy?
Well, it distorts. It distorts democracy. It distorts the way representative democracy works. It also distorts the idea of democracy because television and radio oftentimes are passive. The only active thing you can do in commercial radio is call in and hope that a producer will think that you're witty enough to go to the air, where you can get insulted and then cut off. Or if you're calling into a non-commercial radio, you might actually get to say your 2 cents and be listened to. That doesn't happen in commercial radio. That doesn't happen in commercial TV hardly at all.
Have you ever tried calling in?
I have. Yeah, I've been a person that's calling in. I have been held off at the gates by Fang before. Fang is the person who answers the phone and decides whether you will get to the air. Okay, or talk to the decision maker if you're a salesperson or whatever it is. But Fang is the person that hangs up the phone and says, "No, they're at lunch." Oh, that's funny. They've been at lunch for the last 4 hours. Fang is the person that says no.
I kind of want to say something here. I've been in town a couple of years and I've listened to Free Radio Olympia, I think the whole time. Somewhere along the line, maybe probably once every 3 months, I give Free Radio Olympia a call. And it's always kind of a surprising thing. And I'm a bit nervous, like, okay, I got to go turn down my radio so there isn't a problem with interference. Yes. And I get on the line and somebody says, "Hey, you're on Free Radio Olympia." And I'm like, "Oh, wow, that's pretty cool. I'm out here. I'm actually reaching people.
Yeah,
I'm reaching the neighborhood."
I've been able to, on several occasions, be down at a news event, call the radio station when there's somebody there. They pick up the phone, they put me through to the air, usually in a couple of minutes or less, and say a live news report 3, 4, 5 minutes after it's begun happening or while it's still going on, and actually describe something from the street live. You don't get that in commercial media unless you're watching the Super Bowl. I mean, you really, you don't get that kind of live on the spot coverage, and you can't make something like that happen unless you have community radio. I mean, that's what community radio is all about. If I tried to call from Olympia and tell Seattle news stations what's going on in Olympia so that people in Olympia could watch that, it just would never happen. I wouldn't get through to the air.
So this is a good direction to go. Say, for instance, you really want, as Joe Citizen, if you really want to get something out there, obviously we can call the local, maybe the college station, maybe we can call you guys.
I have done that.
How much would it cost for us to get something through on the major networks?
In order to buy advertising, and which is about the only way that you can get onto the major networks.
To really have that big mouthpiece, reach a lot of people.
You fall under a couple of different... First of all, they don't have any, there's no law that says if you have the money, they have to take your ad. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times what has happened is people will come out with an ad against the war, or they'll come out with an ad against prohibition of marijuana, and they'll try to get that ad into commercial radio or commercial TV, and the people who are running those outlets will say, no, we're not going to take your money and we're not going to run your ad. If you try to call into a call-in show, you've got an even shot of getting through to the air, but it's going to be mediated. There's going to be a host, they're going to be arguing against you or cutting you off. You're going to get maybe 30 seconds, maybe 2 minutes, if you're very lucky. And you're not actually going to get that 2 minutes to yourself. You're going to you have answers, you're going to have to answer questions. That person is going to fire their, viewpoints at you constantly while you're trying to dodge.
Yeah.
On Free Radio Olympia, you can pretty much go to the air and say your piece for 5 minutes or 10 and, have a voice that's speaking to your community.
Yeah. Hey, here's something. Why don't you give us a little comparison about, maybe for instance your show. I know I've heard you talking about the port, some other issues that have happened in town, protest movements, whatnot. Why don't you give us a little comparison between how a local station, pirate radio station, whatever it is, picked up a community event, talked about it, and the coverage that might have happened or didn't happen from the big corporate media.
Well, we did have an effect, I believe, in the port coverage when the military shipments were coming into the port. I was able to get on Free Radio Olympia, and a lot of people found out that ships that were coming in to drop off cargo, or ships that were coming in to pick up military cargo, that event was happening, that could get down to the port. I don't think that it had a lot of effect on what people did, but the fact that people had a warning that it was going on gave them the decision-making time that they needed to make those decisions about what they were going to do. Not all of those decisions are, actions that the broader community supports.
Yeah.
Some of the broader community was disappointed, for instance, in the cutting of the fence and things like that. But those people had that time to make that decision because they heard reports on Free Radio Olympia.
That's all the First Amendment right. Essentially, if actually, let's take a little time and go over First Amendment rights.
Okay. I'm going to need to break really quickly and cue something.
Okay. Yeah. Go for it.
And I'll be right back with you in a moment.
Are you all done?
I'm done queuing that.
Oh,
I just needed to slip that radio program in there when it was finished.
I didn't want to interrupt you. For all I know, this could be going out over the airwaves, and I'd be truly embarrassed. Well, hey, it's going to happen.
Well, I usually have to pick up the microphone in order for that to happen. This is, the secret to how it works. It's just like your band.
Yeah.
You turn up the knob here, you talk into there, and you have to make sure that the thing is on, and then you're talking on the air.
Oh, kind of scary.
And that right there, that was a felony. That's the felony. Being there is not a felony. Being here and doing this with the little slider thing, that's the felony. That's as simple as it is.
Let's talk about that. Why do you think it's a felony for Joe Citizen, to be able to reach a large percentage of the population, to be able to communicate, with that big mouthpiece, to be effective in reaching so many people?
Essentially, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, you answered your own question in a way. We used to have laws in England and in colonial America that said that you couldn't have a printing press unless the king had a tax collected from you and had a stamp that was affixed on the printed material.
Okay.
So you had a king's censor that basically, had to approve everything that was printed, and it was actually illegal, actually still is illegal in Britain, to print an embarrassing truth about the crown, about the government. It's literally, it's called libel. And they had those laws in place in the United States, and the people who created the Republic in the 1700s basically overthrew that whole regime and said, no, we're not going to have licensure of the press. We're not going to have licenses on presses. We're going to get rid of that regime. They instituted the First Amendment. Congress shall pass no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right to assemble, for addressing grievances, or establishing a religion. And that law, that constitutional amendment guarantees us the right. The right comes from the fact that we're born, but the Constitution guarantees that right to us. And that's the difference between the United States and Britain. we're basically in exactly the same position now here in America that our colonial ancestors were with regards to the printing press, only with radio.
Okay.
We have to have a license. The king has to say it's okay for us to be on the air. We have to be saying the right kinds of things. If we're not saying the right kinds of things, they'll try to pull the plug on us.
Okay.
Or if we're Al Jazeera, they'll try to send a missile up our ass.
Yeah. Actually, recently I was trying to Google Al Jazeera, and it was kind of a fun process. I was reading about Teflon of all things. You go figure. Let's get back to the whole notion of regulation. I mean, we've got a perfect example. Here we've got the FCC. In other words, a regulatory body. I mean, what's its function?
Well, its function is to make sure that everybody that has a piece of the radio spectrum,
or any broadcast spectrum.
The radio spectrum includes TV. I mean, it's all part of the radio spectrum. Okay. Electromagnetic energy in the radio frequencies is used by commercial entities and nonprofits to broadcast images and sound.
Okay.
And that is regulated by the FCC. There's also data communications that are regulated by the FCC, but those aren't usually used for entertainment. That body was set up in the 1930s because people used to have radio stations of varying powers, of different kinds of modulation, and they just did their thing, and they talked to each other. They're called hams. And people had shows that were about religion, and people had shows that were just talking about things, and people played music. But people clashed. They didn't have any way of coordinating who was going to be on what frequency.
Okay.
And a lot of people that wanted to make money and wanted to play music on the radio to make money and sell advertising knew that they had to have some regulatory scheme to make sure that people were going to stay off of their frequency into the future and guarantee a piece of that public airwaves. That belongs to the public. The FCC never got around to requiring rent for any of that public space.
Okay.
And yet that public space gets used, camped out on, staked out by private interests which sell advertising and privatize the profits from those public, goods. They're taking a piece of the lawn out of the town square and saying, I'm going to feed this to my cow, sell the meat, keep the money. But it started out as our public property. And that's basically what's happening with the electromagnetic spectrum. That's radio spectrum. It's been sliced up by the FCC. So the FCC's job is to make sure that everybody plays by those rules.
Let's go back to who controls the FCC. I mean, obviously,
the federal government.
Okay, the federal government.
The federal government controls the FCC.
For, in short, what benefit once again?
For private benefit.
Okay,
essentially for private benefit.
How about is there a benefit to government?
Yes, government gets a benefit. Radio stations which are licensed through the FCC are required to allow the Department of Defense to take them over in an emergency by automatic remote.
What about the whole notion of, and this is where I've had a gripe before, that a regulatory body overseeing a radio station basically says, we like your content. We approve of what you're saying. Is that not true? Is that a misnomer?
They're supposed to stay away from content regulation. The letter of the law keeps them away from content regulation, but the financial structure of society and the financial structure of their requirements mean that you're going to have certain kinds of content that are underwritten and other kinds of content that have to be subsidized.
Okay.
So there's precious little spectrum left that's actually community-oriented, locally broadcast, locally oriented media. More and more what we're seeing is media coming from one place, going to everybody in the country.
Okay. How about this? Who is allowed to have a broadcast license?
In order to get a broadcast license, there are many, many, many hoops to go through. First of all, there's almost no spectrum left to open up a new channel or a new frequency. So you're looking at this stage, unless you're in micro radio, buying some existing entity, whether that be a nonprofit that had a license on a given frequency and can't operate that anymore, or doesn't have the volunteers to do it anymore, like KEXP, for instance, was bought, was an educational license which was bought by Paul Allen and then started playing a whole lot of music. That was an educational license, which was converted to technically non-commercial use.
Okay.
But it was a lot of music which came out on independent and commercial labels, and it was a form of advertising, even though they didn't sell
what about
underwriting.
Now, here's something. What about NPR?
National Petroleum Radio.
So, here we go. We've got something that's in theory a nonprofit.
Yes.
So is that a different category to get their license?
NPR is a radio network.
Okay.
They don't own radio stations. My understanding is that they're an entity which creates news content which is played on public radio stations.
Where does their news content come from? They make it?
They
comes
make
to them?
it. Yeah, it comes to them. Independent producers give it to them, or they are. I suppose that they probably have a staff. I'm not really overly familiar with their operations. We play Free Speech Radio News because they're a collective which does the same thing.
Well, I've definitely found, as far as content-wise, the type of content that I've listened to again and again, be it on community media, be it on the college stations, be it on the non-licensed stations, and of course in for the most part, the non-profit media, is much more diverse.
Yeah.
You're going to get a much broader spectrum of what's going on in our world.
Heck, you might even get to hear black people speaking about their own problems. I mean, you don't get that on regular TV. I'm sorry, it just doesn't happen. You might get Bill Cosby.
Yeah. But
I'm not going to go further than that. But, you might actually get people speaking in their own languages.
Yeah, not a very
we have the vast
range.
history of the world on this station.
That's great. Hey, before we run out of time, I got to mention a couple things. I was doing a little Google search earlier on, and I came across a group called Corp Watch. I got to read this off here if you don't mind. So just a couple of basic facts to see how media and democracy and the government all kind of plays. So here we go. So far this election season, broadcasters have donated over $3.5 million in hard money contributions to candidates. Okay, so there we go. Over the past 3 years, the big 5 media companies, so we got Disney, which is ABC, News Corp, which is Fox, GE, which is, I guess, NBC and Telemundo, Viacom, which is ABC, Time Warner, which is CNN and WB, plus the National Association of Broadcasters. They've spent somewhere around $79 million. Okay, $79 million lobbying your government. Whose government? Who's really getting the ear of our politicians there? I mean, what kind of effect is that going to bring? So here's another one that's pretty good. So obviously they pretty much buy their politicians to have whatever they, in my interpretation, whatever they want. Here's another thing that's pretty good, and this also is from Corp Watch. It can be hard to determine which partner is leading the dance at any given moment. General Electric, which owns NBC, spent over $45 million on lobbying in 2003 alone. So here we go. GE is also a Defense Department contractor with an annual revenue of $134.2 billion.
They bring nuclear things to life.
Yeah. They're basically profiting very handsomely from the Iraq War.
Yes.
Yeah. Enough of that kind of mean stuff. How about, let's talk about, from your point of view, if people want to live in an honest goodness democracy. You want to define democracy for the viewers out there? What's your definition?
Well, democracy is ruled by the people.
Okay.
And that gets pretty broad because oftentimes it's not. People don't agree on what it means to be a person. But essentially, if you want to have democracy, you need to get out and do it yourself. Okay. There's representative democracies, such as we're used to here, electoral politics and so forth, but things that are hands-on, like operating a radio station, heck of a lot more fun.
Okay, so what's your advice to people that want to be in that kind of sphere?
Get involved.
Get involved.
You can, if you want to, apply and join Free Radio Olympia. We're not the only radio station in town. We do have a website, www.frolympia.org. Free radio.
Yeah. What was the phone number here again?
It's 705-9780 is the phone number. But there are other radio stations in town.
Okay.
There's KAOS.
Yeah.
It's more difficult to get a slot there. They're much more established. There's also KOWA, which is a licensed low-power FM radio station that has a license through Media Island International. Yeah. They need energy and talent and help. They have a license, and they're trying to get off the ground. They will have very diverse voices on that. I've got friends who are in that. They're a good station to support. We have independent media in terms of the internet. We have independent media in terms of printed matter. There's a lot of things that you can do media-wise to ensure democracy. Information is the basis of community decision-making. Yeah. Community decision-making is democracy.
We're going to probably close this up here pretty soon. Just kind of one last thing. you know, I'd like to impress upon anyone watching this is, if you want to live in a democracy, you got to get out there and you got to be a participant. You just can't sit at home and watch the TV and listen to what the corporate media wants you to hear and you to understand. You know, we're all nothing more than our collective sources of information. Good enough. Thanks again, Drew.
Thank you.
We got politicians running races on corporate cash. Now don't tell me they don't turn around and kiss them people's ass. You may call me old-fashioned, that don't fit my picture of a true democracy. It feels like I am living in the wasteland.